Someone else asked a
Thank you.
question. What was it?
Oh, I had asked if she could send that to us when this is over. Thank you.
Caroline, you have a question?
Yeah, just really quickly. I took that lockdown browser like quiz, and question 6 like didn't appear for me at all.
That's weird.
Yeah, there were some messed up questions in there as I'm trying to create questions, and that was part of it for me too, is practicing putting together a test like that.
Okay.
So yeah, and I think there were some like on the matching one.
Yeah.
There's like matching, and then there's one that without it's like blank.
Yeah.
But it like forces you to pick. Yeah. So I'm doing some troubleshooting there as well.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like I had any problems.
No, that was an error in the way I set up the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That was it.
Yeah, and that might happen on the actual test too.
Okay.
And we're figuring things out as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Fleck, I have a question.
Go ahead.
For someone who has asthma, how would that affect their AVO2 difference?
So the asthma is not going to affect the AVO2 difference. The asthma is going to affect the pulmonary diffusion. So asthma is like a constriction of the bronchioles, which is going to make it harder for you to get the oxygen into the alveola. And if you're getting less oxygen into the alveola, you're going to have less diffusion into the blood.
Right.
So I guess you could say that it wouldn't affect AVO2 difference. It would affect the amount of oxygen you're able to deliver to the muscle.
Right. For your hemoglobin. Yeah, we talked about this before.
It'll be harder for you to saturate your hemoglobin. Gwen, you have your hand up?
Yeah. I'm sure Rachel already asked this in previous office hour, but something we had talked about was how is muscle different in you said for every pound of fat you gain 400 miles of length, which would increase peripheral resistance. How is muscle different than fat?
Regarding the vascularization, I don't have a number for that.
Okay. But does like an increase in size from muscle also?
Yeah, because you have to vascularize that tissue as well.
Yeah.
So any gain in weight, whether it's muscle or fat, will add vessel length.
Okay.
I think I asked that last time too.
Professor Fleck, does your body adapt to epinephrine daily being secreted by exercise?
Adapt meaning respond less?
Yeah, I guess become what's it called?
Become accustomed to the epinephrine?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. Your body will still respond to the epinephrine. But as you train more, you'll release less.
Oh. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's a good thing. It's one of the things that will contribute to you having a lower heart rate.
Right. Oh, yes. That makes total sense.
But also the whole cardiovascular system will become more efficient with training, which this is all, everything we're going to talk about after the midterm is all adaptations to training. So your heart is going to become more efficient, so your stroke volume will increase, so you get more blood out with each contraction, so it doesn't have to contract as quickly to deliver the same amount of blood. So it becomes more efficient. Vanessa, go ahead.
So to increase red blood, like the red blood cell count, there's 4, right? So it's altitude training, endurance training, blood doping, and water intake to increase plasma, or would you not include water intake?
Well, water intake does not increase red blood cell count. So if you're talking about ways to increase red blood cell count, that's not one of them.
It just helps it, right? Just so it decreases hematocrit levels?
Right, so the benefit of increasing the water intake is that you can have an increase in red blood cells without an increase in hematocrit.
Thank
but
you.
that's not causing an increase in red blood cells. So I think you started
Right,
out by,
that's very
by
good.
talking about what causes an increase in red blood cells. And there are other things besides those things that we talked about.
Okay,
Increase
thank you.
Okay, so there's intrinsic and extrinsic control of blood flow. There's intrinsic and extrinsic control of heart rate, and intrinsic and extrinsic control of blood pressure. Or
What would be intrinsic control of blood pressure? I don't have an intrinsic control.
no, okay, so it's blood flow, heart rate, and is there a third one? No, okay.
Not that we talked about. Rachel, go ahead.
I have a question. So how would you compare athletes of different sports if they have similar lactate threshold?
Compare them for what?
So like, I don't know, if you're comparing them more aerobic, like how would you find out who's more efficient, I guess, in their movement? If they're doing different sports, their sports require different movements and they have similar lactate threshold, then what would you look at?
Well, you have to define what you're trying to compare. Efficiency and movement.
That would be more biomechanics. But I guess like on a physiology level, like would you take their blood and look at like their hemoglobin concentration, or
I don't understand what you're trying to compare. It's like, so if you have a volleyball player and a basketball player,
yeah, I guess aerobic capacity.
so that would be VO2 max
Right.
or lactate
If it's
threshold.
similar VO2 max and it's similar lactate threshold, then what would you do?
Well, then it goes to economy of effort, but you can't compare two different sports for that. It would
Right.
be like comparing two different runners. One has more efficient form than the other.
True. So it's specific. That makes sense. I'm just curious. Oh. Okay. So I was talking to Armin about this yesterday. Which of your venous return mechanisms can you improve with being trained?
Those aren't dependent on training.
So like you don't improve those venous return mechanisms with training. Oh, okay. That's not one of the adaptations that we're gonna, okay. Just curious.
I had issues with Zoom on my phone before, so I'm just going to try to close it on my laptop and open it on my phone just to make sure that it'll work.
Yeah, I had a question about that too, because the Wi-Fi sometimes in my bedroom, like it barely handles one laptop. So I'm worried that it's gonna like close down or something on my phone. And I don't want you to think it's because I'm like
Okay.
cheating or anything.
Okay. Well, we're testing this out and see how it goes.
Okay. I'm an honest person, I promise.
Professor, I have a question.
Okay.
So like if you were to look at like a trained child and then you were to look at like a trained adult and then like you look at their intrinsic, extrinsic control factors, would there be differences based on like lifespan, like adaptations and that type of thing?
Define child.
Like, okay, like a teenager, like a 16-year-old gymnast.
Okay, looking at intrinsic and extrinsic control of heart rate.
Blood pressure, all of the above.
So intrinsic and extrinsic control of blood flow is, no, that does get better with training. So think about that. Would there be, no, there shouldn't be a difference, except that it takes time for those adaptations to occur. So if the 16-year-old has been training for 6 months and the adult has been training for 2 years, the adult would see probably more adaptations than the teenager, but not because of the age difference. It's just because of the training.
And then also, I'm assuming their aerobic capacity, like the adult would have larger lungs too, right? Technically. So their aerobic capacity would be higher because, like, technically you're not fully mature, like your body isn't fully like grown until you're like 23.
Right, so the ranges I gave you for average VO2 max, it applies to adults, not to children or teenagers.
Right. I can probably look those up and find those, right, for kids.
There are probably numbers for teenagers, probably not for pre-adolescents, but probably for teenagers.
Oh, I have another question.
Mhm.
How do what's the best way, like if someone wanted, like if you're working with a client who has like high blood pressure and like they may not necessarily be like high blood pressure because they're like overweight, but maybe just because of stress factors and that type of thing in their life, and they're trying to work on decreasing their blood pressure. What like approach would you do when it comes to exercise? Would you implement more like high intensity training, low intensity training, or like a combination of both? Just to work on that blood pressure.
Yeah, so let me think about that. So blood pressure depends on cardiac output and peripheral resistance. So training will affect viscosity, it will affect cardiac output. So the endurance training is probably more going to affect the blood pressure than the resistance training. So I would probably focus on that. Make sure they stay well hydrated, make sure they get a good warm up and cool down, and make sure they don't do the Valsalva maneuver.
Oh, is that going to be on our exam?
Valsalva maneuver?
Yeah.
You should, yeah, that's it on your list of terminology.
That's what I was thinking. Thank you.
Vanessa, go ahead.
I'm just making sure I wrote this down correctly during lecture. What determines baseline VO2 for the untrained? Is it just gender, or would it also be fiber type as well?
So it is genetics. 25 to 50% of baseline untrained VO2 is determined by genetics. And that genetics includes lung size, blood volume, fiber type, because those things are all determined by genetics. Which is why men tend to have higher baseline VO2 maxes, because they have larger lungs, higher blood volume, and more muscle mass.
So it's just genetics. It's
25 to 50% of baseline depends on genetics.
Thank you.
I can't remember if you said that cardiovascular drift was something we should know for this class, or okay.
Yes, you need, yes, cardiovascular drift. Yeah, we should have covered that in the review.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys want to go over that? We should go over that.
Yeah, and it's just the increase in heart rate without the increase of intensity.
Yeah, when does it occur? Why? How?
In hot environments, and you're dehydrated.
So what's causing the dehydration?
It increases vasodilation of the skin. It increases sweating. Increases.
If you're increasing sweating, what is that doing?
It decreases your plasma volume.
Good, which does what?
Decreases your total blood volume. And then that would therefore decrease your stroke volume. Okay.
And if your stroke volume is decreasing, what has to happen?
It lowers your cardiac output.
Oh, increase your heart.
We can't let the cardiac output decrease because we're trying to maintain our intensity.
Oh, okay.
So we need cardiac output to stay the same. Stroke volume is dropping, so what has to happen?
Increase your heart rate.
The heart rate has to increase to help you maintain your cardiac output.
Okay. Okay. So that's why it's an increase in heart rate without an increase in intensity, because you have to maintain that same output.
You have to maintain the cardiac output in order to maintain the intensity.
Cool.
Yes. So what has tended to happen in the past when I have people explain this back to me is they're listing all those different things, the vasodilation of the skin, the sweating, the less blood flow to the heart, the decrease in stroke volume, the decrease in plasma volume. They're listing all of these things, but not connecting them. So make sure you can connect them. This is causing this, is causing this. So when you give them, they really should be in a certain order because it's causative. So it's not just a listing of these pieces of information that you've memorized, but it's a process.
They're like arrows pointing to each other. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, the basics of it is the definition of cardiovascular drift, when it occurs, tends to be in a hot environment, and then you have the details of the process of how it occurs, and it should end with stroke volume is dropping because of all of these different things, so therefore heart rate has to increase in order to maintain cardiac output.
And then what details do we need to include about like the vasodilation at the skin again?
So that would be explaining why stroke volume is dropping. So because of vasodilation at the skin, you're increasing your sweating, decreasing the plasma, decreasing the venous return, and the stroke volume. That's one way we already went over. The other way was because there's more blood going to the skin, there's less blood going to the heart, which means decreased venous return, which is also a decrease in stroke volume.
So could I try to say in the order that I just want to make sure that the order I know it is correct.
Yeah, for sure.
So an increase in vasodilation. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So an increase in vasodilation of the skin due to epinephrine causes increased sweating. This decreases total blood volume because there's a decrease in plasma volume. Therefore, there's a decreased stroke volume. Decreased stroke volume is an issue because the requirement for oxygen is staying the same. This means cardiac output should be staying the same. If stroke volume is decreasing because of sweating and losing plasma and the redirection of blood to the skin, this means less blood is going to the skin. This is a decreased venous return. If cardiac output needs to stay the same, stroke volume rate.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a 10 out of 10 answer, except that you accidentally said because there's more blood flow going to the skin, there's less blood flow going to the skin, which I'm assuming was just a brain fart. And you didn't.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that was a great answer.
Thank you.
Could we discuss the graphs about hemoglobin saturation? And like go over, let me see. Because those are the only ones I'm like almost there. I'm like this close. Are you gonna put the graphs on, like how do you think you'll ask about those? Like, are you gonna put the graphs up and have us label or?
I wasn't able to do that. So it'll just be talking about it. I'll ask you about to explain it, but there won't be, you won't be able to draw the graph and there will not be a graph on there for you to identify.
See, they need to make these things more
Which
interesting.
graphs?
The hemoglobin saturation curves.
Yeah.
Visual learner in me is very disappointed.
The teacher in me is very disappointed.
For all of those, like for the saturation curves in the blood pH, could they technically go on the same graph if you color coded each one, or are they three completely separate graphs?
They could go on the same graph.
Okay. Yeah, because they have the same axes, so you could probably just put them all.
Yeah, they would just be overlapping each other since we don't have specific numbers on there.
So each one would be different values, obviously. So they'd all look different on the graph, but they have similar shapes, like the curves.
Yeah, I'm not sure how different they would be.
Mhm.
Let me think about that. No, I think they would be overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the test, when they calculated like someone who has low pH, did they like take their blood when they're exercising and then like measure the hydrogen in there and see like, oh, it decreased, and then they would take their blood like when they're resting and then they like compare it? That's really interesting.
Dr. Spelkus does stuff like that.
Is in regards to heart rate, is bradycardia a bad thing necessarily, or is it just?
Well, I mean, a resting heart rate of 50 would be considered bradycardia, but there are plenty of elite endurance athletes that have that.
Mhm.
But if you're much lower than 50, then it could be dangerous.
Hmm.
Like if someone's at 40, they're
Yeah.
probably not delivering enough oxygen
Mhm.
to their brain.
Mine is like 53 or 54, but I'm not like an elite athlete. Is it also like genetic? Could it be related to?
Could be. Mhm.
Okay.
Does it have anything to do with size too? Because she's so small, like Emily's short.
It shouldn't. It just has to do with your parasympathetic nervous system being very active, most likely.
On the chapter 5 terminology, it says like exercise associated muscle cramps. Do we just need to be able to know what that is? Or
That's coming after the midterm. That shouldn't be on this.
okay, because I was about, yeah. And then there's also delayed onset muscle soreness.
That's after the midterm.
Okay.
Where'd you see that, Emily?
It's on the chapter 5 terminology sheet.
Yeah, I think the book might talk about it in that chapter, but I'm going to talk about it later.
Professor Flex, so you said temperature in the environment that you're working out, it doesn't necessarily affect like your like, I forget how you worded it, intensity. Like you should be able to maintain an intensity if you're well hydrated, even if you're like in a hot environment.
Yeah,
Right.
so the issue with the hot environment is that you're redirecting blood flow to your skin.
Right.
So that's the sweating issue, which if you're staying well hydrated, won't cause too many problems. But the other problem is that you have, because you're redirecting blood flow to your skin, there's less blood flow going to your heart.
Right.
So
How would that affect hemoglobin saturation?
that won't affect hemoglobin saturation. That'll affect stroke volume.
Because I'm looking at this graph and it says temperature is going to be high at exercising muscle, decreased pH, decreased low, like you have low blood saturation. So the temperature is the result of the exercise, not necessarily the environment.
Correct. That's not temperature in the environment. That's temperature at the exercising muscle. Will
Okay.
affect the hemoglobin saturation. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Fleck.
You're welcome.
In regards to like Fick's law and like the rate of diffusion being proportional to like the surface area, is that something that's just like genetic again? Like you, or is that you can build that obviously like relates to?
You can build that
Mhm.
because endurance training causes you to increase your capillary density,
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Whoa.
which will increase your diffusion rate, which will
Okay.
increase your efficiency. Mhm.
Cool.
Ask that again. What was the question?
It's just like in regards to Fick's law, we learned that like the rate of diffusion is proportional to the surface area. And my question was like, how does that improve, or is it genetic? And it's basically just capillary density. So all those things that improve like your oxidative abilities.
So after the midterm, we're going to talk about all the different ways your body adapts to training.
Cool. And it kind of just puts everything together, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Rachel, I think we were talking about that the other day when we were saying like you get more muscles and so
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah. The more overlap you have.
Yep.
Professor Fleck, I came up with an analogy. I talked to Armin about it. He tweaked it a little bit. For Henry's law, it's like you can think about like, you know, the Mios containers. So if you just put 1 drop of Neosin, then it's going to be a low partial pressure, which means that you're going to have low diffusion rate. So then if you put the whole Meos container in, then it's going to be high.
What is Meos? I don't know what that is.
Meos is like the little energy, like they
It's
have
a concentrate. It's like a syrup.
Okay. That you put in what?
Replace it with like food coloring, essentially. It's just a colored additive to a drink, but it's like got like energy in it.
Okay.
And then Armin says, well, you should say that in the Meos, there is like low oxygen and then you have like high CO2. So if you know you have low oxygen, then it's going to diffuse out of the lower. I'm like, see, now you're killing my analogy.
Yeah, that's like a personal analogy.
Henry's law,
It's gas though.
yeah, but it's just about the efficiency that there's not a lot of gas lost in that transition. So if you're bringing a lot of oxygen into your lungs, you're going to get a lot of oxygen into your blood. It's not that you're only able to diffuse 20% of the air you're bringing in. Most of the air you're bringing in will be transferred over.
Okay, so it's more about an efficiency standpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the higher the partial pressure of the gas, the more gas will go over and dissolve. So it just means it's an efficient process. If you have a lot of the oxygen present, you'll get a lot of oxygen to move over.
Right. I like this analogy for the pizza, for Dalton's law. It's like O2 contributes $5 to buy the pizza, and then CO2 only contributes $1 to buy the pizza. Who has greater partial pressure? So the one who contributes more to the pizza is going to have, so O2 has a higher partial pressure than CO2. So,
yes, but the reason O2 is contributing more to the pizza is because there's more O2. So each oxygen molecule can only give 1. So let's say if we separate it between men and women in our classroom, okay, each man and each woman is giving $1, but there are more women than men. So women are contributing more to the pizza than the men.
right.
So it's not that a woman contributes more than a man. Each contributes the same, but there's more women than men.
So it's not an individual, it's as a whole.
Right.
They
So
contribute more.
if 20% of the air we breathe is oxygen, it's contributing 20% to the total air pressure. 80% of the oxygen we breathe is nitrogen, it's contributing 80% to the total air pressure.
I like that.
Do we have to know those numbers, 80-20?
You do not.
Okay.
Just an example.
Can you explain gas gradient to me? I think I have it, but.
Yes. Gradient is a difference.
Oh.
So like, remember when we were talking about the resting membrane potential? And we said it's more positive on the outside than it is on the inside.
Okay.
And so the molecules move to equalize that pressure. That potential is a gradient. It's a difference. The potential is a difference in charge. The gradient is a difference in pressure. So the molecules will move in order to equalize that pressure, to equalize the gradient. So the bigger the gradient, it means there's a bigger difference. So if we're exercising and the muscles are consuming a lot of oxygen, then the blood that's coming into the lungs from the muscles has low PO2 as compared to the high PO2 in the lungs, so there's a larger gradient. So the gas will diffuse faster. If we're not exercising, the muscles are not extracting very much oxygen from the blood that's returning to the heart will still have a lot of oxygen in it. So there's not that big of a difference. So the gas will diffuse more slowly because you don't need it as much.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the rate of diffusion really depends on the need of oxygen. The more you need the oxygen, the faster it will diffuse.
Professor Fleck, do you have any research on PubMed?
Do I have any research on PubMed? My research, is it, I probably, no, because my research was not published in a journal. My research was published in Shape Magazine.
Shape Magazine? Is it online?
In the archives, probably. It's from 1,000,000 years ago. And also I have research published in the ACE journals. But I don't think that's on PubMed.
Do you have
That's
like,
cool.
I'll try and find it. If I can't find it, I'll email you. Do you have a copy that you could send me a?
I do.
Okay, cool. I like.
It's on Body Pump. You heard
Oh,
of Body Pump? I did
Yes,
I
I
my
love
master's
Body
thesis
Pump.
on Body Pump back in 1998.
Nice. I love Body Pump.
Are there ever, like, would you have to go into specific research areas about like individuals with special needs and disabilities and how everything we're learning is affected by them?
that'd be so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know how much research on that has been done.
Mhm.
I've never looked that up. You could certainly look up and see what's been done, and then you can come up with plenty of ideas for your master's thesis.
Yeah, because it's just like a lot of everything that we're learning basically is based on like a quote normal, like healthy individual. And it'd be really interesting to see how all of this like compares to individuals who have like, you know.
Have you done?
Yeah, I know there has been research done in those areas. It's just, it's not my area, so I haven't read a lot of it, but it's definitely there.
Emily, have you done Special Olympics?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so fun.
Yeah, my mom's actually the CEO of a nonprofit called Ride On Therapeutic Horsemanship.
Yeah, you told me about it.
Yeah, so they hosted the equestrian portion of the Special Olympics in 2015. So I did that, and then so I've like worked with PTs at Ride On, and then this year I was actually a swim coach for the swim team, but it got canceled because of everything. So it's really sad, but it's okay. Everything happens for a reason, I guess. But yeah, I just like my whole like reason that I'm studying all of this is because I was brought up in like a special needs environment, so it's just always interesting.
That's super neat. No, I love it. Professor Fleck, have you heard of what was my question? This is why I have to write it down. It's in one ear and then flies away. Oh, got it. Professor Fleck, have you heard of Results Fitness?
Results Fitness. Is that a local company?
Yeah, it's in Santa Clarita. It's Alwyn Cosgrove and Rachel Cosgrove. They're super cool. They're one of my mentors. I talk to them a lot, but they get a lot of like special needs clients, and like he's done research too. I think, do you know Jenny Vu? Jenny, she's in 3 Winds. She works there too. They're really cool. But yeah, have you heard of what's it called? Like what certificates would you recommend for like someone who wants to get in the fitness industry? Like
for like personal training, Group
Yeah.
X?
NASM.
NASM, ACSM, ACE. Those are the top ones. There's AFA as well. NASM. Those are the main ones.
I'm looking at Armin's PLF worksheet. He has breathing frequency on his list of like terms to know. What would you?
Was that on my list of terminology?
I don't think so. I don't think I have that one here.
So breathing frequency is like breathing rate.
Mhm.
Breathing rate is affected by epinephrine and carbon dioxide, acting
That's
on
like
the inspiratory centers in your brain to increase your breathing rate. So
kind of
that-
like what you're talking about with the hyperventilation.
Yeah, but even just during exercise. So like we said, as you increase your intensity of exercise, you're producing more carbon dioxide from the bicarbonate buffer. The carbon dioxide triggers the inspiratory centers in your brain to increase your breathing rate. Epinephrine does the same thing. So that's what we talked about regarding breathing rate.
Thank you.
Emily, I just thought of something. You should get involved in iFit with Dr. Todd. It's where we work with autistic college students, and we do like workouts with them. And she didn't do research this semester, but now they're doing it as a group workout program. So they have kin students, like I'm one of the kin students, and we come in and we work out with them, and like you encourage them, because an issue with autism is like, I think there's more central nervous system fatigue. Unless their passion is working out, then that's different. But that's really cool that one of the things she researched.
Yeah, for sure. Text me more info about it, and I'd love to.
Okay.
That's through CSUN?
Yeah, she does it through CSUN. It's with Dr. What's his name? Sports psych professor. What's his name? He teaches, oh man, what's his name? Not Ashley, it's a dude. He wears his hair in a ponytail.
The surfer one?
Oh, Shane? No, not Shane.
Is he a tennis player?
Yeah, is he a tennis player? Like blonde hair?
Yeah, I like him.
He's fun.
I can't remember his name.
I think his last name is Fisher or something, right?
Oh, no, it's Jensen.
Jensen, yeah.
Yeah, he does the mindfulness for that. So we do the workout, and then we do mindfulness at the end. Super fun.
Jacob Jensen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him, Jacob. Yes.
Professor Fleck, I never told you this, but after that online workout we did, I couldn't walk for like 2 days.
Really?
I was so
Arms hurt.
sore. I had to go on like little jogs around just so I could like get movement in my
I'm
body.
doing another one tomorrow.
Oh my god.
What time?
This Thursday and next Thursday, 8:30.
Professor, you should do the Drake dance. Have you heard of it?
Oh my gosh, London.
Which one is that?
It's like you put your like right foot up and then like out and then you put your left
Right foot up, left foot slide.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
I'll have to work on that.
She has 2 teenage daughters. I'm sure she knows that already. Or 2 teenagers.
I'm on TikTok more than she is.
Professor Fleck, have you done any TikTok workouts?
No. TikTok can only be a minute.
I know, but you could do some workouts. My friend she does it to me.
Did you say 8:30 tomorrow?
8:30 tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll send out the
Yeah.
I follow someone on YouTube who does workouts to songs, and it's like very
Oh
fun.
yeah. Wait, is it that girl that like always does it?
Maddie Fit.
Yeah, that girl. She's cool. I like that. Professor Fleck, have you heard of training effects? Like on Garmin, it'll give me like my training effect. So it rates it from like 1 to like 5, and then 5 is like you're improving, but like if you stay there too long, then like you're overtraining. So it's like kind of like a rating system of your intensity, kind of.
interesting.
It's called TE. And they calculate it with your recovery heart rate. So afterwards they take your heart rate for like 2 minutes. So you're just supposed to just kind of like walk around, and it'll take your heart rate, and it takes your initial heart rate as well when you start working out. So kind of like EPOC kind of looks at that.
Because the more fit you are, the faster you recover.
Right. And then it gives you a recovery heart rate.
Mhm.
Oh, that's it. I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, so within 2 minutes of stopping exercise, you should be able to reduce your heart rate by a certain amount.
Right.
Professor, can you ask us some questions? Just like
Sure, I'm going to be asking you a bunch of questions starting at 12:30.
I know.
London, you got it.
Yeah.
Let's see, London. London, can you define AVO2 difference?
Say it again.
Define AVO2 difference. It's one of the last things we talked about in our last lecture.
Can you give me a clue?
What does the A and the V stand for in AVO2 difference?
It's the ventricular valve. No.
We're all just jumping at the bit to answer this.
Yeah, you go ahead, ask me.
Isn't it the difference? So oxygen coming from the arteries going to the muscle and the vein. So the difference for what oxygen is consumed at the muscles, like from the arteries to the veins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The difference in the oxygen content between the artery and the vein, which reflects oxygen consumption of the muscle. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How did they calculate that? Where do they get those numbers?
I don't know if they actually measure that or it's more theoretical.
Okay, but it makes sense.
Probably, yeah.
It makes sense though.
I mean, they could extract blood from the artery and arterial and extract blood from the vein, but I think it's more theoretical.
Yeah.
Conceptual.
Dang. That's
Okay,
bad.
London, can you? Okay, London, we didn't get to this question in the 9:30 class. So give me the formula for stroke volume, cardiac output, ejection fraction, blood pressure, and hematocrit. Let's start with stroke volume.
Start with what?
Stroke volume.
Stroke volume. It's heart rate times. No, that's not it. Wait. Stroke volume. Yeah, heart rate times something.
No, heart rate does not contribute to stroke volume. Stroke volume, what is the definition of stroke volume?
It's the amount of blood pumped in the left ventricle per beat.
Okay, so the amount of blood you can get out in one contraction depends on the amount of blood you can get in and the amount of blood that's left in. What are those things?
Oh, okay, yes. You get so it's end systolic volume minus end systolic volume.
End diastolic volume minus end systolic volume.
Yes.
Good. Cardiac output?
Cardiac output equals heart rate times stroke volume.
Yep. Ejection fraction.
Oh no.
If you think about what it means, that'll help you figure out the formula for it.
Well, ejection fraction is like deals with end systolic volume. No. Yeah.
Emily, do you have this one?
What was the question?
Formula for ejection fraction.
Ejection fraction. I have it. Oh yeah, it's the systolic volume divided by the end diastolic volume times 100.
SV does not stand for systolic volume though.
Oh wait. Stroke volume.
Stroke volume.
Not systolic volume.
Stroke volume divided by end diastolic volume, because ejection fraction is what percentage of the blood you are able to eject with during one contraction. So stroke volume, the amount of blood you're getting out, divided by end diastolic volume is the amount of blood available to get out, times 100 to make it a percent.
Okay.
Okay. London, blood pressure equation.
Blood pressure.
Short and expanded, please.
Oh man, I forgot the short one.
Emma, do you have those?
I don't want to look at my notes, but I don't know it.
Cardiac output times CR peripheral resistance.
And can you give me the expanded formula?
And then
Where's my notes?
that's where I get stuck. Do I include heart rate times stroke volume?
Yeah, so heart rate times stroke volume is the breakdown of cardiac output. And then what's the breakdown of peripheral resistance?
Velocity over radius to the fourth power.
Right, so the expanded formula is just taking that shortened formula and breaking down the cardiac output and then breaking down the peripheral resistance. And you could also take that one step farther, and you break down cardiac output into heart rate and stroke volume. You could take that one step farther and break down stroke volume into end diastolic and end systolic volume.
Wait, say that last part again. You can take it further and what?
Because we broke down cardiac output into heart rate times stroke volume, but we also have a formula for stroke volume. So we could take that one step further and break that down.
3 tiers.
Yes.
Is the formula you want us to know for heart rate just 220 minus age? Or is there another
Well,
formula?
that's max heart rate.
Yeah.
So I didn't give you a formula for heart rate.
Okay.
But if it was max heart rate, that would be how you'd estimate max heart rate.
Okay.
Yeah. And the last one is hematocrit.
Hematocrit. Oh, it's right here. It's formed elements divided over total blood volume.
And that tells you what percentage of the blood is formed elements.
Yes.
But that one is not times 100.
No.
Good. Yeah, make sure you guys know those formulas. Those are on there.
Yeah.
Professor Fleck, what's considered hypertension again?
120 over 80 or above. Sorry, 140 over 90.
Yeah.
Isn't it over 80 still?
But only one of them has to be high. They don't both have to be high to be considered hypertension. So the 140 or the 90 would be hypertension.
Is hypertension like high blood pressure or abnormally high blood pressure?
Abnormally high resting blood pressure. So remember that it's normal for your blood pressure to increase during exercise, and we have a very detailed explanation of that. But resting blood pressure, normal resting blood pressure is 120 over 80. 140 over 90 would be high.
What do the numbers represent? This might be really silly question.
Well, definition of blood pressure is the amount of pressure exerted by the blood on the walls of the vessels. Those numbers are in millimeters of mercury. Did you guys take blood pressure in the lab?
No. No.
Did you talk about blood pressure in the lab?
No, it was all before. We were supposed to learn that like after.
So you just didn't get to it yet.
We're doing that.
What are you doing?
For my
We're doing that in my lab.
Oh, we're not doing blood pressure.
Yeah. So what are you guys doing in lab now?
Like,
like a write-up.
That's a great question.
Blood pressure.
Yeah.
We had an online quiz.
Our lab is a joke.
You had an online quiz, but are they getting together and teaching you things, or are they just giving you things?
No, she just sends out PowerPoint slides to us, and then we take a quiz, and then we have like a write-up on it.
Do you have Nicole, Gwen?
No, I have Werner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I teach the lab with PowerPoints.
Yeah.
Well, now that it's online, yeah.
She's sending out a lab for us to complete, but there's like minimal direction. And then when we email her, she's like almost put off that we're asking further questions. And it's our lab is a joke.
It's like my physics lab.
But was it like that before the online issue?
No, we actually had like we did like workouts and stuff together before.
Ours
Yeah,
was
I
still
have
hit and
to-
miss before. Ours was still, she doesn't
Yeah,
doesn't seem to be loving her job.
It's unfortunate.
Who do you have?
Nicole Noor or something like that. Nicole Noor.
I thought it was like Stober or something like that. Stober.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have her as well, and it's
Okay.
like, yeah, I have her, and a lot of it is like minimum effort.
Yeah.
It's like, it's unfortunate because I'd love to be able to learn to like how to apply everything, but it's difficult. I understand that.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
you know-
totally making me read the book though. Like I'm like, okay, let me go ahead and read all this.
Back in the day when I was a grad student, I was teaching those labs, but I would teach it much different now. Like if I were to go back and teach it now, my knowledge is just so much deeper now than it was back then. And I'm a little more passionate now than I was back then, and I think I could do a better job now. So, you know, they're grad students, they're still learning too. So. Not just learning the information, but learning how to teach. I mean, for most of them, it's their first experience teaching, and knowing the information doesn't necessarily make you a good teacher.
And she was, I think, pretty honest with us in the beginning that she like teaching is not her thing, and she had no interest in it at all.
It's like being good at a
Right.
sport doesn't necessarily make you a good coach. You know, it's
Right,
a totally
yeah.
different thing. So
I did watch her presentation on the symposium though, and it was really interesting. Like she did, and it won second place, I think, and it was like really good. So
Is that the one we were all supposed to watch that one day?
mhm.
The reason she canceled class? Oh, I couldn't get on. It kept like freezing up on me.
No, I enjoyed it, and there was actually loads of different presentations. She went last, so I sat through 2 hours of presentations, but it was good. She
Yeah,
talked about
I tried watching it and I was like, this is freezing so much. I can't handle it.
she talked about like yoga and how that affects like amputees and like their positioning and everything. It was interesting.
Yeah, she's very, very passionate about yoga.
if you find something you're passionate about and then can apply your topic to it, that's a good thing.
Professor Fleck, whenever I go to talk to my dad about exercise, he's like, I'm going to go work out. You go talk to the TV.
That's great.
Yeah, but teaching is not easy, you know, like I want to be a PE teacher, but I realize it's like, you know, it's not hard. I mean, it's not as easy as I thought it would be.
Yeah, well, with that comes managing kids.
Yeah.
Which is a whole different thing. No matter how much you know about physical activity, you've got to know how to manage a big group of kids.
It's herding feral cats is what it is. It's
Pretty much.
at least that's been our experience so far, the schools that we've been to. I'm like, these are like wild cats and we have to herd them all.
Yeah.
That's one reason I like teaching college, because like my best friend is a third grade teacher, and it's like some of her time is spent actually teaching, but most of her time is spent just managing the kids. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people told me they're like, you have the energy level to teach a preschool class. And I'm like, oh, that would be cool, but no.
Yes, but do I have the patience? That's what that's where it comes. Yeah.
I mean, I think I would because I like energy levels like that, but I mean, it's not my thing. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Fleck.
You're
I guess
welcome
the next time I see you will be Monday.
for your exam.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then Rachel, if you want to Zoom or whatever this weekend,
Yeah, let's study.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Professor Fleck, all my questions getting answered has been like some of the best things in this class. Like you don't even know. Like it's so funny. I was running and then I started just like recording myself and I was just talking about everything and then went home, listened to it while I was studying, and then like I found out where like the holes are. I'm like, I didn't mention that. I didn't mention
Wait until after the midterm. when
I
we
know, I'm
start
already
to
doing that
apply
stuff.
all that, you're gonna have light bulbs. Wow, it's gonna be, it's good stuff after the midterm.
Yeah.
Those last couple lectures are good.
Armin told me I need to trust the concepts and not overthink it. That's the only thing I have to work on. But the thing is, I like asking questions because then it helps me understand it more.
Yeah, that's good.
So then you can get, because if you have even one like little question in your mind, you might not understand the full concept. I mean, not everything can be explained and knowledge is always changing, but like to understand the baseline stuff is important.
Yeah, the more you can apply it, the deeper your understanding is. So, and also the deeper your understanding is, the more you can apply it. So as we get, when we get to the final, the more questions on the final will be applied than conceptual.
And you said you do limiting boxes on the final, so you can't write detail?
Well, that's not going to happen here.
Well, you could do word count.
In class, yeah, I'll give you a box and you have to answer within the box. I won't read anything outside the box, but that's not going to be here. The purpose of that is because when you get into 446, you have to answer concisely.
Right.
So, like you have to be able to boil down your answer into a sentence or two and not go on a rambling essay.
Right.
When there's a short answer that can answer the question.
So like for fatigue, you would just say decreased ATP production, you would have less muscle contraction. For glycolysis.
Well, no, I want you to be able to explain the details of that process.
Yeah.
But without adding a lot of extra information that doesn't answer the question.
Would 446 want you to go into that level of detail with the sliding filament theory and all that?
It depends on the teacher.
Yeah.
But for some of those things, I go into more detail than you need in 446. And for some of the concepts, they go into more detail than what I teach. So
yeah, like protein synthesis.
Depends on the teacher and depends on the concept.
So zero. So 60 to 100 beats per minute is the normal heart rate, correct?
Normal resting heart rate.
Normal resting heart rate. Okay.
A trained person will tend to be on the lower end of that range, 60 to 80. Untrained person tends to be higher, 80 to 100, but they're all considered normal.
Okay.
So if it's under 60, that's technically considered bradycardia for low resting heart rate. But what if you're like a trained person and you're like at 55 or?
Yeah, so there are a lot of elite athletes who are in the 50s, and that's not an issue. It's just kind of an outlier. But anything below 50 can become a problem because you're just not going to be delivering enough oxygen.
Why is there, like for a trained person, why is their heart rate low? Or
well, London, we're talking about that after the midterm and adaptation training. But for the resting heart rate, it's mainly because their parasympathetic nervous system becomes more active. So remember, the parasympathetic nervous system is in charge of decreasing your heart rate at rest.
Yeah, yes.
So a more aerobically fit person has a more active parasympathetic nervous system, and therefore they have a lower resting heart rate.
Okay.
The reason their heart rate is lower during exercise is a different story, and that we'll talk about later.
Okay.
I know, because one of my friends, he's such a good endurance runner, athlete, like he's crazy. He does ultras, and his heart rate is like 67, and we're like on mile 5, and I'm like, bro, like what is going on?
Yeah, so a trained person will have a lower resting heart rate and a lower submax heart rate, but for 2 different reasons.
So if you're doing endurance training and you're like an endurance athlete, when we talked about how like steady state oxygen levels reach steady state, so you're at a comfortable pace or comfortable zone, is that also when your heart rate is does that also correlate with like a low heart rate even when you're exercising?
A trained person will have a lower exercise heart rate, yes. And we'll talk about why after the midterm.
Esme, remember when we did those runs in Stillwell's class, and what's his name? His heart rate was like crazy low, like was my resting heart rate after he had ran. What's his name? The tall kid?
Oh, Daniel.
Daniel. And Daniel's heart rate after that, like those sprints was like nothing. That's what it is, because he's a runner. So yeah.
Can I explain the pathway of the heart? The blood going through the heart, the pathway.
Please do.
Okay, so you have deoxygenated blood goes to the right atrium, goes to the bicuspid valve, to the right ventricle.
It would be tricuspid, but I'm not going to ask you the valves.
Okay. Okay.
But you have to try
bonus
before you
points.
buy. So the tricuspid valve comes first.
I'm sorry?
You have to try before you buy.
Yeah.
Tricuspid valve comes before the bicuspid valve.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I remember that analogy. Okay, so deoxygenated blood goes to the right atrium, then goes to the right ventricle, out to the pulmonary valve, to the pulmonary artery, to the lungs. The blood becomes reoxygenated, then goes to the pulmonary vein and goes to the left atrium and goes down to the left ventricle, then to the aorta, and then that's where hemoglobin and oxygen comes in play.
No, hemoglobin and oxygen is coming in the lungs where we're diffusing them, but that's not part of this process. You described the blood flow through the heart. Everything was perfect. You don't need the valves for me.
Okay.
But you do need the vena cava.
Oh, okay.
So the blood is entering the right atrium through the vena cava.
Professor Fleck, do you have any good book recommendations?
For what?
For like training and like even like textbooks you would recommend?
Well, I really like the NASC book for strength training techniques. That's the textbook for 417. I really like that book.
Can I ask a quick question about what London just said? It comes out of the right ventricle through the pulmonary artery, but it's deoxygenated.
It's deoxygenated.
Yeah, there, right? And then it picks up oxygen at the lungs, and then in the pulmonary vein, it's oxygenated.
Oxygenated, yes.
Oxygenated. Okay.
Yep.
And then so at the capillaries is gas exchange, and then something else. Let me see. And that's where carbon dioxide goes to oxygen. Am I right? Or
You're talking about in the lungs, the gas exchange in the lungs, or the gas exchange in the muscle?
I'm sorry. Yes. In the lungs or muscle. Yes.
Yeah. So in the lungs, we have pulmonary diffusion. Oxygen goes from the lungs into the blood. Carbon dioxide goes from the blood into the lungs.
Yeah. Okay.
Professor Fleck, have you heard of the book? It's called the 80-20 method.
It sounds familiar. I don't
So
know.
I read it over the summer, and that's why I was super excited when we learned about all the four sisters of the working at low to moderate intensity, because the theory is you do 80% of your, if you're an endurance person that's trying to focus on more endurance activities like distance running, you would do 80% of your mileage at low to moderate intensity, and then you do 20% at high intensity. What's your opinion on that?
I think it depends on what stage of training you're at.
That's true.
If you are new to endurance training, more of your time should be spent endurance training. But remember that VO2 max is limited. So after you've been training for a couple of years, you've hit your capacity on VO2 max, you need to start focusing on lactate threshold. So the more well-trained you are, the more well aerobically trained you are, the more you should focus on interval training
Hmm.
to increase your lactate threshold.
Like, would fartlek runs be good too?
That's part of interval training.
Yeah, I love those. Those are my favorite. So fun.
Professor, you said we're not supposed to focus on the either the stroke volume or the cardio output. I forgot what we were discussing. Like,
To focus on it for what?
like I don't know, how can I say this? Like you're not supposed to, like, I don't know how to explain it. I'm trying to think. Like, based on what we were talking about, you said it doesn't like the stroke volume doesn't matter or the cardio output doesn't matter at this. I never.
What you're referring to?
Sorry, I forgot.
Thanks, Professor Flag.
You're welcome. All right, you guys, I'm going to take a few minutes before
Okay.
my next class.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
All right.
Can I
grab a
ask one
sandwich.
quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
There was another question from Armin's worksheet that says, what is the formula for VE? I don't even know what VE is.
Ventilatory, I didn't cover that. Ventilatory threshold, I'm going to cover later. Ventilation, yeah, I didn't cover that.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Thank you. I'll see you in class.
Okay.
All right.
All right, bye.